Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport and welcome to the Macau Festival Crash Compilation for 2024. Every crash from this year's festival around the tight and twisting street circuit. Always plenty of action, and that hasn't changed in 2024. The Macau circuit is long and difficult and there are many ways to crash. The poor weather also didn't help things. This car nearly loses it, but it's the one following that you need to keep an eye on. Looping around, but mostly getting away with it. Not a lot of space to overtake, it's better to bail out than hit the tyres. Either he was going too fast for the conditions, or something is wrong with that car, because that is a lot of understeer. He almost gets collected by the next car through, but they did well to avoid contact. That's as fluky as they come. 1 mile an hour faster and he would have been buried. And that's what happens when you fail to scrub that 1 mile an hour and get sucked into the tyre barrier, running wide and losing the back of the car. One of the more common crashes at Macau, you'll notice this car already has some damage prior to this incident, so the driver has obviously been exploring a lot of the walls and barriers around Macau. The weather is awful and another car losing it on the straight, although I don't think you can blame him given the conditions. He is the only one to do it, however, so maybe we can blame him. Bouncing both ends of the car off the walls. The weather makes things difficult, but so does your competitors making contact with you on a wet track. Onto the World Touring cars, Martin Xi getting it all wrong and being in the wrong place as Gary Kwok arrives on the scene. 10 times winner Rob Huff in the Audi is not the car to watch as Martin Chow enters the frame and hits the wall. And watch as the other Hyundais squirm in avoidance. The hairpin might be one of the slowest corners in motorsport, but cars do occasionally lose control here. This is a very neat parking job nonetheless. And Martin Xi gets it all wrong at Lisboa once again. This time crashing all on his own, well out of the way of everyone else. Our first look at the teeth on the front of the Chinese touring entry Lincoln Co's, but it's the Audi of Fan Wu Yi who is getting into trouble here. And that is TCR World Tour runner Marco Butti headbutting the wall, and as he comes back onto the circuit he gets caught by teammate Esteban Guerreri as the gap between his stricken teammate and the wall starts to get smaller and smaller. Even his other teammate Dusan Borkovic has a little nibble on the back corner. But all would come good for Honda later in the weekend. You can see on board with Guerreri that Butti just gets a little wide and hits the barrier on the outside of a very tricky section. He won't be the only person to crash here. Now onto the start, and with so many cars on a tight track, you can almost expect an accident at the first corner. However, some won't even make it that far. Santiago Arusha, the car not moving on the grid, and everyone else piling into the back of him. Luckily, only a few cars get involved in that one. Later in the lap though, we make it past the first corner without incident, but we don't get much further, as Esteban Guerreri gets turned around and blocks the track. 3 into 1 just doesn't go, especially not around Macau, and when a second car gets turned around, the rest of the field are not going to be making it through either. This is the Macau parking lot. Wait for it. Wait for it. That's Yann Erlaché sliding the back of the car into Lisboa and somehow getting away with it. Doyun Huang and Juan Carlos Zhu bang door to door as neither man wants to give way to the other. Huang definitely comes off worse and may feel a little aggrieved. That is a very fast and out of control Hyundai, definitely damaged, but that could have been a much bigger accident. I feel like he got away lightly, and maybe some of the other cars around him are thankful that he didn't come back across the track. Another Honda outbraking itself at Lisboa. This time it's Jamie Lai Jingwen hitting the tyres. We move on from touring cars and into the GTs, and the increased speeds make the difficult conditions, well, even more difficult. A lot of sliding and a lot of damage to this very pink Mercedes. Entirely deserved for painting "Come On Baby" on the side of your car. Two Ginettas arriving at the same point at the same time and making contact. The red and white car was going far too slowly, and the gold Ginetta couldn't avoid hitting the back of him on his way down the runoff. This BMW does a fantastic job of avoiding an accident. A couple of cars have crashed, and the BMW driver did well not to join them. That's a little bit wide, and that's contact with the wall. And that's very deranged suspension. And that's not going much further. This was the Great Bay Area GT race. The Toyota Supra in second is all over the place, looking for a way through, and looks like he's about to come a cropper. But in fact, it was the lead BMW who buries his head in the barriers and goes no further. Others make contact sneaking past. That's another Ginetta going off as we move on to the big boys of the GT World Cup. Mara Engel was the eventual winner of the Macau GT World Cup in 2024, and here he is in the rain showing the skills that took him to a fourth Macau GT win. Unfortunately, there's nothing he can do about a Ferrari blocking the road at the hairpin, and he joins the growing car park waiting to get by. The situation gets even more tricky as more and more GT cars arrive on the scene, and the roadblock gets worse. Cars arriving at speed make contact with stationary cars, and a mess turns into a catastrophe. This might take more than a few seconds to clear up, and cars reversing are only going to make things worse for the cars still to come down. At least the drivers coming now have a chance to slow down as the red flags come out. The sensible drivers take to the runoff when they get things wrong. Luca Engstler having a moment, not his only one of the weekend, more on that later. Whilst Sheldon van der Linde swipes the wall at speed and damages his BMW. Not the best way to prepare for a race at Macau. Here's another Audi losing it under braking and hitting the wall. Can't see who it is, I'm blinded by the lights. Laurin Heinrich in the Porsche running wide and brushing the barrier. All of a sudden the car digs in and gets turned around, and despite the relative low speed of the contact, it still does plenty of damage to the 911. Another Mercedes going off here, and this one hits the wall very hard, bouncing back into the middle of the track. Different corner, different Mercedes, but very similar results. This one didn't hit the barrier quite so hard. Whilst Luca Engstler's Lamborghini absolutely did hit the wall hard. Very hard indeed, and that Lamborghini is not even worth selling for scrap. Happily, Luca Engstler was okay, but that was a very scary looking crash indeed. Laurens Vanthoor doesn't crash in quite the same spectacular way, but the results are the same. Damaged car, out of the race, and feeling a lot of regret. Antonio Falco had just taken the lead from Raffaele Marcello when the two made contact at Lisboa and went down the runoff, giving the win to the Mercedes of Mara Engel. Now we move on to our final category, the single-seaters, and Rikuto Kobayashi, the first to crash a Formula Regional car at Macau. Ignore these two, Alexander Abkazava is about to come and escape down the runoff. Next up, Rikiliu gets it all wrong, but doesn't make it down the escape road, hitting the barrier sideways instead. Jet Bowling decides to crash at a different corner. This won't be the only time we see him crash in this video. Sometimes you see a situation and think, how big is the accident going to be? Only to be completely surprised when one is narrowly avoided instead. Kai Dariani deciding to bail out down the escape road right in front of Evan Gilter, but at least they didn't make contact for a change. Another Evans GP car going and hitting the wall. Whilst on board with one of the Premas, you can see how difficult it is to see in the wet. Moving past one car in the spray, a bit too quick into this corner, and snuggling safely in the Formula Regional shape runoff. Get that wrong even by a centimetre and the outcome would be very different. Rintaro Sato gets it all wrong and doesn't find the runoff. What he does find is two very fast moving Premas who can't avoid him and instead try to plough through him, doing a fair bit of damage to all three cars. You can see on board with Dino Bogdanovic the gap is too small to get through, and the Swede is going far too fast to avoid making contact with Sato's broken car. Tuukka Tarppanen was my pick to win the Macau Grand Prix this year, but things started going badly for him after this incident in qualifying essentially relegated him to a place down the back end of the field. And another gets it very wrong. What you don't need is other cars playing games on the exit of the pit lane. As these cars slow down, looking for a gap to begin their qualifying runs, the cars behind are coming out of the pits and getting up to racing speed. This is what happens when they meet in the middle. One car losing a front wing, but it could have been far worse. Sometimes avoiding action just can't be taken, and that is only made worse if it's your teammate's car that you hit. James Wharton has already had a crash, and Evan Gilter can't do anything about the inevitable contact he's going to make with his fellow ART driver. And that means a very busy evening for the team to get both cars ready for the Grand Prix. This is Jet Bowling again. The American was not having a great weekend at Macau, and this was his second impact with the wall so far. How more cars managed to avoid contact in this massive crash at the start of the qualifying race, I'll never know. From the back of the field, you can see the two cars on the outside lose the back of their cars and hit the wall. One of those drivers was for Finn Tuukka Tarppanen again, making progress off the start before losing it and hitting the wall. It honestly amazes me that everyone else avoided these two cars as they skated down the racetrack. James Wharton crashes again and again. Evan Gilter hits him. It looks like everyone else is going to avoid him, but then around 5 cars pile into the Australian. And yes, one of those cars is Jet Bowling. On board again with Tuukka Tarppanen, but it's not him having the accident this time. Someone else is burying their car into the wall and Tarppanen managing not to get involved. Valerio Rinicella managed to keep it out of the wall until the very end of the Macau Grand Prix. Nice view of the harbour from there. Sota Agara is another that lost it on the straight part of the track, but he does at least park well out of the way of any cars coming around the corner at this very fast part of the track. Ugo Ugachukwu was the first American to win the Macau Grand Prix since Bob Earl in 1981. He did so because he was brilliant off the many restarts to the race, keeping him well in front of the pack. But here, whilst he slowed the cars down just as the race is about to get underway again, many behind didn't get the message and a minor pile-up did occur. A few cars damaged here. And we end with the rather brilliant Freddie Slater hitting the wall. Thank you very much for watching. Make sure you subscribe for more motorsport. We will be back with Macau in 2025. So, until then, have a good one.